So first question for you, and I love that I found this out doing research about you. One of my favorite films as well is Seven. It's a
Hmm.
classic to me, and I think it's going to be re-released in theaters early next year for the
Really?
anniversary of the show.
Hmm.
Um, that film inspired one of my favorite writers, Chris Carter, to create my favorite show of all time, Millennium. Um, the opening credits to that film had a big impact on you. Can you talk about that title sequence and how it led you down your path as an editor?
Yeah, I think when you watch that opening title sequence for Seven, you learn so much about the story, and there's no dialogue, and I think at the time when I was watching it, I was like, this is interesting because it's, obviously it's very stylized, but you do learn about this character who you don't see until later in the film, but you learn so much about him through the opening title sequence. Um, and that's essentially what editing is. You're trying to tell a story or convey like an emotion or follow the intention that maybe the director had or a script had,
Mhm.
um, within the edit. And so I just thought that was so interesting. I didn't know editing was a profession at all, but immediately after I saw that movie, I like started just trying to like replicate I'm like, oh, let me try with my home movie camera and like VHS tapes and splicing them together, and just trying to create little moments. And I just didn't realize that that was editing. um but it really, that title sequence holds up to this day. I still will like watch it for inspiration sometimes because it's just so well put together, but just a really interesting stylized way as well.
And another important factor of those title sequences, and I'm sure you learned this down the road, is the music. The
Hmm.
song they used for that was just
Yeah.
absolutely perfect.
Yeah, and so much of editing too is about pacing and rhythm, the rhythm of the cuts, the rhythm of, whatever music you have underneath, the sound design. So, and I used to be a dancer. That was my original career. So, it all kind of came together, I think, once I realized editing was like an actual career path that I could follow. It just somehow, even though dancing looks very different than editing, it is kind of a similar thing in that you're trying to tell that story or convey a story with, with that mood and pacing and
And
picking up.
rhythm, obviously.
Exactly.
What impresses me about people like yourself who just decide that they know what their passion is. You pack up, you move to LA, don't really know anybody. I'm sure you don't really know anybody, and you decide that you're going to become an editor. I mean, what made you decide to do that? And it takes a lot of courage and guts to do something like that.
I think because at the time I lived in Colorado, I was really interested in screenwriting also because I didn't know of editing as a career at all. So I was like, I'm going to go to LA. I'm going to see if I can become a screenwriter. So I was kind of knocking on doors thinking, oh, I would love to write. Can I like shadow you? Can I do, just trying to meet everybody I could. And then I found like an assistant editing job, and then I was like, this is actually more in line with what I'm trying, like what I would like to do. And it's similar to the Seven, the Seven opening title replication I always tried to do in high school. But trying to, I guess, just moving to LA was just something that, in Colorado there's limited opportunities, I think,
Yeah,
to work within TV and film. And I kind of knew at some point, dance is a profession that, after a certain age you can't really keep it. It's
right,
not a long-term
right.
career, so even though I was doing that professionally, I was like, this isn't forever. I know I need to, if I want to work in TV and film, I have to make a move to either go to LA or New York. And LA seemed like the more fitting uh location, so I
Yeah.
just picked that.
Doing research for this interview, I found, and you've talked about this a little bit, and I don't want to make this a race thing, but it was interesting that you said one of your early jobs, you had a white male editor tell you that a black woman couldn't cut this particular show that you were going to be working on.
Hmm.
Did you use that like some kind of light, like fire underneath you to get you motivated? And I'm wondering what that person's doing these days. Who said that? And we don't need to
No,
know who the person is, obviously.
Yeah, I won't tell you who it is. I did look that person up recently. They're not, I think they left the industry actually. But also, yeah, I think it kind of like it was like just a maybe a fi like lighting a fire under me, even though I was already so excited to be editing. It was just like
Yeah.
I'm just gonna prove this person is an idiot. It was just like no matter what, I'm gonna edit this project. I'm gonna do the best I possibly can at it. I think I was the final person on for that project. Everyone else wrapped before me, and I got to finish out the whole series. So I was like, "See, it looks like a black woman can edit this show," and I think a lot of my career has actually followed that in a way. Where I'm just like, a lot of times people don't think that you can do something. Or they're like, oh, well, I see she has experience in this, but not in this genre.
Hmm.
So it's so much of it is just trying to prove that like we can do all of it. Why would we not be able to do it? And yeah, I think that definitely was a catalyst in a way for me, that conversation with him. So
Did that take a bit of an emotional hit on you initially, and did it like kind of open your eyes up and say, okay, maybe this might be a little more difficult wanting to do this career?
yeah, I think I mean I was still like fresh in it at the time, right? I
Yeah.
was still green, so it's like, already my confidence, I was feeling imposter syndrome. Um I was just like, I hope I can do this, and then that guy, just kind of crushed my spirit a little bit. So, and I think, there's so few black editors in our industry, unfortunately. I think it's changed a lot over the last few years, but it took me a very, very long time to like meet someone else who looked like me, and um, I do think it does take a toll on you, because it's like you walk into these rooms and you're the only one and you have to explain, like it's like you're the spokesperson for
Yeah. Yeah.
for everybody, which isn't a fair thing either. Um, so I think it does take a toll on you, and even when I work on projects now, if I'm the only one, it's like I'll always still push, I'll always try to add my insight or nuance where I can, but it's like also reminding people that it's important to like have a post team that's reflective of the world around us, like yeah, it's been an interesting journey, but I do feel like it's slowly starting to change. I'm not always the only person in the room anymore, and I think people are more open to hearing the things we have to say, because for a long time as well, and sometimes I still get this vibe sometimes, but it feels almost like you're put there for the optics, right? It's like, well, we found one, and
Yeah.
I've felt that
Yeah.
a lot for a really long time. And I do think that's slowly changing, but there is why would you bring someone in and say like, oh, we have a black editor, and not listen to what they have to say? And I think that's where it would really kind of like weigh on me a lot, because it shouldn't be about the optics. It should be valuing what the people you hire um, bring to the table, or what perspectives they have, and especially in editing, that's so important to have those various perspectives.
It's interesting. I work in IT as a full-time job, and I try to explain to my some of my white friends sometimes, like we have to live in two worlds. We live in our world
Mm.
and we live in the corporate world. And when we live in the corporate world and have corporate speak, we also have to be twice as good, than the other people in the same industry. Does that make sense?
Yeah, absolutely. I feel like it's always that you always have to kind of go above and beyond as much as you can. I think what's nice now that there's more of us is I think we're all trying to like bring more of us in.
Right.
There's not always people haven't always had those opportunities. I know I certainly didn't always have those opportunities. So it's like now that we have more of a more of a presence in the whole post production space, I am always excited to see like, oh, this person was hired as an assistant editor or as a post PA or as, just so you can start to see people come up who maybe didn't have that before. But it is like two totally different worlds.
What I really love, one of the projects that I actually watched, and it was so cool to find out that you worked on it, was the Ryan Murphy's Monsters and the Jeffrey Dahmer story. And I'm
Mhm.
curious to know do you do any kind of research before you would tackle a project like that? And do you find yourself getting emotionally affected by that kind of story?
Yeah, I usually spend a long time researching for that project in particular because
Hmm.
it's a real story.
Yeah.
To me, it's always so important to understand what you're coming into. I had my I had a knowledge of the story, from the 90s. I remember it playing out. I remember the victim impact statements video, which is so, harrowing to watch. I remember seeing that in the 90s and just ever since then being like, it was so gut wrenching. But also, I felt like that story was so sensationalized over the years. It was all about him and his crimes as opposed to the communities that he was affecting. And so I think, I was excited to be able to push for telling the story in a different way.
Hmm.
And so I did I did do a lot of research ahead of time in terms of like reading books. My assistant editor and I, we read so many books and watched so many documentaries and tried to like delve into just so many different angles to see everything that we needed, understand everything we needed to. Um, Something else that I'll do, just from the editorial side, is like I'll try to figure out what tone a movie or a show is
Yeah. Yeah.
trying to convey. So I'll start to build out like a temp score. I'll build out like a playlist of like, I think this is the kind of temp score that we're gonna want to lay in as we're editing. Um, and so, we did a lot of prep for that, but we also in the process were like, oh, this is an interesting thing we might want to look into. So we would like watch different new things as we were going. Emotionally, it definitely was a project that took a toll. So when we edited this, it was peak COVID times. So I think in a way it was a blessing that we were all remote. We were working on this project from home. And so what I would do, it's like if I knew I had a sequence that was particularly going to be difficult to just to look at for 12 hours straight,
Yeah.
I would try to find ways to like just to step away for a while, or I would like try to balance it by maybe working on a different scene. That for a while I'm like, maybe I just need to like, I'll look at the footage and then I'll go work on something else and then come back when I'm like emotionally in the right headspace for it. And my assistant editor and I would spend, each morning and evening, we would kind of check in with each other, like, how are you today? Is there anything we can like, is there anything we need to do today or think about today that could maybe alleviate some of the, just some of the um, harrowing nature of the story. Um, and that's something I've done on other projects, documentaries, because I got started in documentary world.
Yeah. Yeah.
And a lot of those are also harrowing stories, but you just have to find a way to kind of like step away. Sometimes I would go for walks and listen to music, or you do as an editor kind of, you're like the last person with all the footage. You kind of have control of the final product, and that does take a toll, and you really have to kind of um, find the balance of like, how can I still carry on still carry on my regular life but also tell a story, and especially when you're thinking about the ethics of a story and how to tell it right. um, you just really do have to find that I guess find the balance for that.
Um, did you get to have an interaction with Ryan Murphy? Because he's such a big name in the industry, and if so, what was that like working with him?
Yeah, I mean, he watched all of our episodes, so he would give notes. So basically, the process is like you'll work on dailies while they're filming. You'll
Mhm.
have your a few days to make sure your editor's cut is good. Then you'll sit with your director for that particular episode that you're working on at the time, and you'll work with them until they're happy with it, and that will be the director's cut. So we would sit with them. Then we would sit with Alexis Martin Woodall, who is she's the president of Ryan Murphy, but also she produces all the shows. She's like the showrunner. So you would work through her notes on it, and then at the very end, we would sit with Ryan and work through his notes. So yeah, it was a really, he is just a master of story, I think, and it was really interesting. Um, a couple of the episodes, he was so good at restructuring, right?
Yeah,
And that's something
yeah.
that we do in the edit a lot that people don't realize is like, oh, this story, maybe it would be more impactful if these scenes were swapped, or if this is happening, if this scene gets a little bit repurposed and it gets moved here. So he was actually really, yeah, I just loved like hearing his insight into that kind of stuff. And so it was despite being obviously like a harrowing story to tell, it was a really like, it was a really, it was nice working with that team.
I consider a Black Lady sketch show a very underrated and a dynamic series. I put it up there with like In Living Color as far as groundbreaking.
Mhm.
You obviously won several Emmys working on that series. What I think is so cool, and please correct me if I'm wrong, that show has so many genres within that show. For you as an editor, does that fun for you to edit all these different genres within one show?
Yeah, it was, I mean, that show was a dream for me because I'm sure as you saw, like I love hopping between different genres just
Mhm.
career-wise. I always feel like it makes you stronger as an editor to have those different toolkits. But so Black Lady Sketch Show was really like a chance to do all of the things. Like some days you walk in and you're like, oh, this is like an action movie sketch today, or oh, today we're walking in and it's a rom-com, so it's like,
Funny
each day
show.
would be, yeah, each day would be something a little different, which was really, I think, as an editor, exciting because you're like, what else? I would watch whatever that genre was. So it's like if I know the next day I'm working on a sketch that's based on Saw, or like maybe the tone is similar to the movie Saw, I'm like, okay, I'm gonna watch Saw the night before and like think about what editorial techniques that would be used in a horror movie like Saw, and then you go in the next day and you kind of try to figure out how to like tilt that on its head in a way. You get to kind of yeah, you get to just play with it, which was so fun. And something that Robin Thede, our creator for the show, did, which I loved so much, is she's just kind of like, whatever the first cut you show me is, I don't care. What did it like? Make sure it's the funniest thing to you personally. So it's like it gave us a lot of freedom. It's really exciting as an editor because you get to kind of like, they improvise so much on set. It's like, let me see if I can like pepper in little moments here and there, and how can I take this genre as far as possible? Take it to the edge and see what happens. So it was just a really just a special project to work on in that sense.
Well, you actually answered my next question. What was it like working with Robin? Because I feel she's so underrated as a performer, and it really
She
bugs me
is.
sometimes. And I'm so glad this show has done so well, and so many people know about the show and know about her and your guys' work. So, what was it like working with Robin?
She's a genius, honestly. Like she every moment working with her, I felt like I learned something new. Like she understands comedy in and out, right? So it's like no matter what, she understands a way to fix something. If say something didn't get filmed on set, maybe the way that it was intended, she would know immediately like how to fix it or like things to try to make it work, and she has such a good memory. She would remember these improv moments that like we would not catch. And she's like, oh yeah, it was like take two in at this time of day. Like she would just call it immediately. She just knows exactly where this stuff is. But she's so brilliant. She also, she's, anything marketing wise, she was like on it. She understood how to kind of market the show in the way that she wanted. It was just great being able to kind of showcase her voice, from our post team perspective. It's like it was great to have somebody who really understood what she wanted the show to be and try to be able to make that happen for her, because she is just she's so talented, and so yeah, she's an amazing writer. She's just she understands posts super well as well, which is a treat for us. So it was a dream working with her.
Now, I consider you a trailblazer. I'm not sure if you consider yourself a trailblazer, but one of the Emmys you guys won, you were the first all female team of color to win an Emmy for win a primetime Emmy. I mean, does that make you feel a little bit like a trailblazer at all in the
I
industry?
think I think for me, I'm more like I'm sad that it took till,
Right,
what year that was. I'm like,
2021. Yeah, yeah.
I'm like, I know that we're all out here, and I just want to see more of us, more people that look like us up on stage like that. So I don't know that I feel like a trailblazer necessarily, but I definitely want to push to see more people who look like us in these positions. I want to just see people like flourishing and having, maybe having opportunities that I didn't personally have or that others didn't have, coming up. And I do think that's changing. So yeah, like I think it was just a surreal moment for us to win that, and to be the first, like women of color team to win an Emmy like that. I guess it just, yeah, it was a surreal time, but also just really special, like a really special, memory.
I know you're there to service a story for the director or writer or whatever, but I'm curious, have you ever had a time where you really bumped heads with someone in the editing process and you thought something should go this way, and then no, this is the story, this is what I have in my mind. Have you ever had that situation before?
Yeah, I think it's pretty common actually for,
Really?
I think collaboration is such a huge thing in editing, and there's kind of an image of what we do, which is like, oh, she sits in a dark room all day, and edits by herself. But so much of what we do is like talking to other people and like trying to make sure the story makes the most sense possible, or like follows the intention originally. So, I don't know that I would call it butting heads, but it's like I've had so many conversations with different people over the years where you kind of just like, you just throw out ideas. That's the biggest part of my job, is like, let's just throw out ideas. If this isn't working, let's figure out a way to fix it. A lot of times what happens is like you might get a note that you don't agree with necessarily, but I think there's always some sort of truth to the note where you're like, okay, they have this note, I think it's crazy, but there's something that's making it not read for them.
Right.
So what I'll usually do, instead of having like an argument about it or being like, no, there's no way this will work, that's crazy, is like I'll try to do that note. Like I'll do a couple versions where I'm like, okay, I think this, is it okay if I show you like an alt version, right? So
Got you. Got you.
I'll usually like create, here's the note that they gave and here's what it looks like, and then I'll create kind of like an alt where I'm like trying to like blend the two, um worlds, where I'm like, I think this might actually solve the thing that's bumping them. So usually I'll kind of play with alts, because I think it's, from like an editing standpoint, I think it's stronger when they're able to actually see why something might not work.
Right. Right.
So that's usually my approach. But it is common to have, there's like notes where you're like, there's no way, there's no way, but I'll give it a try. So
I know this might be kind of a big question, but you've been in this industry for a while now, and you've done so incredibly well in this industry. Can you talk about how technology has helped and changed your job since when you first started out to today? Has it made it easier for
Yeah.
you as an editor?
It has. I mean, it's really like a tool. It's a tool for telling the story, right? So it's like, when I started, we had tapes, we were
Yeah,
still, still using tapes and over time, I remember the first kind of like program that blew my mind, and it was a plugin called Pluralize. I don't know if you've ever heard of
I've
that, but
heard of it. Yes,
this
yes.
was probably back in like, I want to say it was like 2010-ish, but it was the first kind of like when you're grouping footage together, when you're an assistant editor, like you're grouping different cameras together. People used to do that, I would do it by, just watching, like trying to match a movement, because a lot of times, especially in like documentary world, because that's where I started, um, there's not slates, so you don't have something to sync it to. So I would try to match like a movement between the two cameras to sync it, um, stuff like that. And so what Pluralize did was it basically would see the audio for each camera, and it would match the audio, so it would sync it for you
Right.
by audio. It would just look at the waveforms, and it's like, oh, boom, there's your group, and you didn't have to spend all the time thinking about how to group it. And so that was something that I think I'll have to look when that actually came out. It was probably like, yeah, I want to say 2008, 2010-ish, but that was the first when I was like, the first moment I was just like, oh, wow, like this is a game changer for me. So, I think, I've seen lots of little things like that come up over the years, which has been nice. And it all really is more just about making it easier to tell the story. Where I do worry is like obviously where AI, how AI kind of fits into
Yeah,
the
that was my
post
next
world.
thing.
And
Yeah,
I,
yeah.
I do think for now it's like still kind of a tool for us. I worry about people, in the future losing work because of it. But I think for now it's like we're still in a place where that technology just helps us. I worked on a project recently actually where, a lot of times what we'll do in our edits is like, we're like, oh, we need a line that says this, but we don't have this actor saying it yet. They have to come back in to record it, the ADR.
ADR, yeah.
So usually what I'll do is like, I'll record the temp ADR, or I'll have like someone else, on the project. If, I'm like, oh, I need someone that sounds like this. Can you record it for me? So now there's a way you can do kind of temp ADR through a program, and it's called, the one that we used was 11 Labs. So what we did is like
Right.
um, you feed it like the voice of somebody, whoever's talking, and then it will do that temp ADR for you. So that was actually really helpful because it made the edit was a bit smoother
Yeah.
in that sense. But I also think, I also worry about regulation for that kind of stuff, because I want to make sure, for us, it's like that's just temp, and the actors will come in and re record that once we're done with the project. So it's just a matter of making sure that stays, it stays a tool as opposed
Right.
to like trying to replace people. So,
It's interesting. I was talking to an actor a while ago who's played a cop for like 15 years on television or whatever. And I said, do you find yourself thinking like a cop when you're like out and about? And they were like, yeah, I always pay attention to where I'm at. I always scope a scene when I walk into a store. It's just like I'm just used to that now that I've played a cop so much on television. I'm curious
mhm.
for you as an editor, when you're watching a program or a movie or something, do you say, yeah, I would have done that a little different if it was me in the editing room? Or have you ever done that watching something?
I have, yeah. There's some types of things, like I used to work, way back when I worked in true crime documentaries for like several years in a row, and I was like, I gotta get out of this, because it was obviously it weighs heavily on you, the content, but also I felt like so numb to that stuff, and also there's such a specific way that they're edited, so that's to me, I'm always extra critical of like true crime documentaries just because of the amount of time that I used to spend spend in there. Um, but yeah, I can always, as an editor, you can always kind of hear, um, if I'm watching like a reality show, you can hear what you would call a Frankenbite. So it's like if someone didn't say something a very specific way, and you have to put words to make to make it like a
Right.
sentence that made
Right.
sense. So like those I can usually hear. But the thing that makes me more excited as like an editor when I'm watching something, for example, not to like go back to From too much in this because I know we're both obsessed with that show. But like something interesting that I saw in the finale is there's a moment where they flash back, um, to Jim and Tabitha in the RV. Do you
Hmm.
know what I'm talking
Yeah,
about?
yes, I know.
And what happens is like the audio is pre-lapped, so that means like you start to hear it before
Before
they
you see
cut
the,
to it.
yeah.
But that show always is very intentional in not doing that. So I was like, that's a really interesting story choice, and I'm curious if that means something for us like next season. So it's like I'll sometimes I'll overly dissect the edits in that way because I'm like, this seems different than the rest of it, and it's just curious where it takes me. So that's what I try to do as an editor as opposed to critiquing, is just trying to find interesting story things or see ways that people are telling stories.
You touched on this a little earlier, but do you feel that the industry is moving in the right direction as far as black editors in the industry? And what would you say to someone who is interested in getting into the industry, especially someone of color?
I definitely think it's like it's been moving in the right direction. Something, and I touched on it earlier, that I do worry about is like people just hiring someone for the optics or to
Yeah.
say they have somebody. And I have seen that a little bit recently, um, for like friends of mine as well. So I think it's going the right direction. I still think it has a ways to go, and like not everybody understands why it's important to have us in these rooms and why it's important to have our voices telling certain stories, um, or lending certain perspectives. So I do think there's a ways to go, but there are people who like actively are trying to make it better, and that's been really like, um, reinvigorating, I think, for me in the past couple years, just to be like, oh good, people like see the issue and they're trying to fix it even if it's slow. um, but also that change I think comes from us as well, as difficult as that could be. But it's, anytime I hire like an assistant editor, I try to make sure it's like, I would love to have like a black woman assistant editor, or a woman of color, or a person of color, just something that will help make the post production space feel, um, more like reflective of the world around us. And for anyone coming into the industry, I think just, mentors are so important. And something that for me, I wish I had, because I didn't realize there were other black editors out there. I wish I had known some to kind of like follow their path or understand what journey they've been on. So I would say for anyone, um, like trying to get into the industry, is just to like find out who those black editors or black people in post or black people in whichever profession within the industry they're interested in. Try to see if they can find some of those. And I know people are always like, oh, social media is whatever, but it's, you can meet a lot of people through that. And
It's
something
still
that
a tool. Yeah, it's still a
it
tool.
is, and something that I always still try to do is like, when I watch something, if I'm like, the editing in that was fantastic, like I'll try to see who cut it. And then I always am like, I wonder if they have like a social media handle, and I just try to like message and say like, I really, really enjoyed your work on this project and congratulations. And just try to meet the community as much as you can. And one of my biggest mentors is someone who I met on Twitter. I reached out to her and said, I adored her work, and she kind of took me under her wing, which I think is just, I think don't be afraid to do that as much as like as especially as editors. I think we all have this kind of imposter syndrome, and we're all kind of in the on the sidelines, so it's like scary to make those steps, but it's a really welcoming, warm community, the post community. So
Like I've
just
learned
to
doing
go
this.
for it.
Yeah, it never hurts to ask. All they can say
Yeah,
is no. Never hurts to
exactly.
ask.
Hmm.
One of my final questions for you, and you've touched on this before. Documentaries is how you got your start, kind of, and you're really involved with activism, especially when it comes to girls, young women.
Hmm.
How did your parents and your background influence your work as an editor?
Um, well, I think, my dad is an attorney. He's a human rights lawyer. And so I think that I kind of was just exposed to different issues from an early age, and kind of seeing things from a different perspective, or from a, more of like a legal perspective, where I'm seeing how my dad is working on different cases. And um, so I think that had a lot to do with me kind of uh, caring a lot about getting involved with different causes, and on the activism side. But also I think career wise, like, my dad is my biggest supporter. He's always as an African dad, I think so many are like, oh, you have to be a lawyer, you have to be a doctor,
Right, right,
you
right.
have to be an engineer. And my dad, like I said, is a lawyer, but he didn't like force that on me either. He's like, he just wanted me to be happy and like doing the things that I cared about, and he's always been supportive of that. I think once he realized like what editing is, more so, he's like, "Oh, okay. now I get it. She'll be okay." um but yeah, I think just having that support system has meant a lot to me. And having that background as well has helped a lot to me. And my dad is from West Africa, and I've, for the most part, been in the States since I was a young kid. So I think that adds like an interesting perspective as well, just having those
Yeah.
two completely different worlds, and like understanding how to navigate that, I think helps me navigate rooms with like very different people. If it's like, oh, the director and producers are totally different, have totally different perspectives, or are clashing, I think I've been able to kind of navigate it um, in that sense as well, because I can kind of see where both sides are kind of coming from. So I think that's helped on just on like a interpersonal level as well. um, and yeah, I think, activism side, I'll always be involved with as much as I can. Usually either between projects, or like I'll come home at night and work on PSA campaigns and stuff like that. So I, just try to stay busy. And I think watching my dad speak up for people, growing up, like emphasized for me how important it is to, as adults, for all of us to kind of speak up for people around us, whether they're our own community or another community that we need to be supporting. I think that's important.
I'm gonna give you a nerd question real quick. If you got a
Sure.
call out of the blue and said, Steph, we're offering you an editing position for one season on any show on television, what would it be? And I think I know the answer to this.
You 1,000,000% know the answer, and that would be from. But you know what else though? Maybe not. It's tough because it's like I love having theories about that show, and like try every week thinking about it. I wonder if I would be sad, like knowing everything, just knowing how the course of that season without being able to have my
To guess
crazy
and
theories.
talk about it, right? Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah.
But yeah, probably from um I'm trying to think what other shows are out right now that I would like. If Fringe was still out, I know we talked about Fringe. Like if that was still a show that was on, am obsessed with that one. So I would definitely work on something like that. But yeah, just just good old From. That's gonna be my answer.
And finally, I don't know if you have to keep things hush hush, but are there any projects you're working on right now that you can talk about, or they have to be hush hush?
I have a feature that I just finished called Horse Girls that should be coming out early next year. Um, so I'm excited for that. And then I have another project with Disney that I finished earlier this year that should be out in March of next year.